There is no replacing Bob ever. There's never going to be another Bob ever in the history of mankind doing the things that he has done and accomplished, and how familiar his voice is, especially here in Milwaukee. I mean, he's done every year of Brewers baseball with the exception of year one. So people know nothing but Bob. It's very similar to what happened in Los Angeles with Vin Scully. Nobody knew anything other than Vin Scully in Los Angeles Dodgers franchise history until he left. And they still play his calls. It's still the Vin Scully press box. You don't forget who these people are. There's no doubt. And his memory, Bob's memory, will live on forever. He is a one-of-a-kind icon in this sport. And Bob Costas said it the other day, even if he never played, or even if he never did any of the comedy stuff, he'd still be a Hall of Fame broadcaster. And it's true, he would be. But there is no replacing him. Whoever ends up being the lead guy, whether it's me or somebody else or whoever it ends up being, just needs to be themselves. And if it's me, fans know me, they know who I am, they know what I do, they know how I call games. Am I going to be as funny as Bob? No, but nobody is. That is an irrational expectation of anybody. So does the thought go through your mind? And maybe that's what was going through my mind when I signed off, is that maybe this is the last time that Ueck gets in this booth. Maybe it's the last time he says goodbye to the fan base. Maybe it's the last time that he tosses to me for the postgame show. I think fans just need to know that he's never going anywhere. He's always going to be a piece of our lives, whether he is with us or if he's not. You just can't forget anybody like a Bob Uecker. And it's impossible to replace him.
The day we knew was coming, yet never wanted to happen, is here. J.A. Bob Uecker passes away at the age of 90. Man, sad stuff.
Yeah, I didn't quite know it was coming. Like, eventually you think that, but when my phone started to buzz a little bit, and did you see the Uecker news? I just thought, oh well, he's officially stepping aside, which, to borrow from his sense of humor, I guess sort of he is doing. But, I just thought that would be it, and that there would be life for that afterwards. So it was a bit of a shock. We found out that he had some other health challenges. I mean, people knew that he had gone through heart surgeries and pancreatic cancer and some of those things. But all I keep thinking is that the man literally never had to leave the job. He worked right up until the last game of the last season that he did. So I think there's something excellent about that there will be a new season, and it will start without him, but he will not have to leave midway through or cut back his workload from what he had done. And while I am saddened that it happened, I refuse to be sad. I have listened to the man and read about the man, his autobiography. I just refuse to let it be a sad day. Like, he is a guy that truly should be celebrated, and he is a guy who made everybody laugh. And I think we should chuckle remembering his personality, his charm, his charisma, and the things he did in life, and the joy he brought everybody there on that magic talking box for 50 plus years.
So many of us equate our career, our life. We've never known Milwaukee Brewers baseball without him. I can tell you that,
other than maybe like one season, nobody knows Missouri. Not just your generation, which is a bit, mine or whatever. Like, it's nobody knows that, right?
Yeah, I can literally go back to County Stadium. I think I've shared this story before. I'm sitting in the seats with binoculars watching Bob Uecker and Bob Betts do their job. It's where I fell in love with the microphone. It's him. And then in high school, when I was working in radio, I was running the board in Beaver Dam on WBEV and listening to Bob Uecker. I mean, it was my life. I got done with school. I drove to the radio station, and every single night there was a Brewers game. The majority of them that year anyway, I was on the board listening to him. And I think that's, I don't know, people around the country know how much of a treasure he is and was, if you will. But to Wisconsin, I think it's different. It's just different here. We literally lived it with him.
Yeah, and I'm a kid that grew up from the time, I can remember listening to Brewer games. I don't know how young was I, 7, 8 years old, and our family radio. It wasn't quite like it was a big piece of furniture like we're listening to, way back in the day. But we had one on the desk in the kitchen, and I'd sit and do my homework, and I'd turn it on, and I listened to him. And in my case, he was with Merle Harmon when I first started listening to him. And, that's how I, again, loved the Brewers, loved the baseball. And they weren't on TV every night like they are now. Like, that was your connection. And even to some degree, I always joke about our age difference. In 83, and so when you were a kid, even in 90, like, every game was not on all the time, right? People's connection with the Brewers was him and that voice and him describing what was happening at County Stadium on the radio. Now, certainly years later, he still was on the radio, but he did some stints in TV and everything else. But by and large, everybody grew up listening to him on the radio, and that was your connection to the team. And as you said, he became well-known nationwide through Johnny Carson, through doing baseball, NBC's Game of the Week, through Mr. Belvedere, all these things. But because he came back every season, he was there, right? Like, it didn't matter. He did all this other stuff. When the season started and the Brewers came on, Bob Uecker was there. And I think that's why people even treasured him more, because you're like, he did all this stuff, but he was still ours. And he came back, and every time when the game started, when the Brewers' new season came and they come on, Uecker was there. And I think that's one of the most amazing things, because he had more than enough chances to go do whatever he wanted to. He had the wealth and the he didn't need that at all, but yet he did, because that's who he was. And there's always a special bond between baseball clubs and announcers like that and the audience. That's whether him, Vin Scully. Now that I'm here in Missouri, Denny Matthews for years with the Royals, Jack Buck with the Cardinals. Harry Carey with those guys always, Mel Allen when he was with the Giants. Like, there's just always that unique connection, especially for a guy that did it for more than half a century. But he was ours, and he came back every year, and he did those Brewer games.
Hello again, everybody. That's how it always started.
Yeah.
And we all know how it finished, and we all know what the home run sounds like. And it's going to be weird. It is going to be weird when we go about it this season. And gratefully to us and what we've done with this show, we've been able to talk to a whole bunch of his colleagues and a number of the people that were either players or coaches or old players, whether it was radio colleague or TV colleague. Mm-hmm. We are full up on Bob Uecker's stories to share with you today. We have stories from Jeff Levering, whether it was that last game or him talking about Grandpa Bob, right? Lane Grindle.
Well, I like the DA when he was trying, you're trying to fit in and you ingratiate yourself, but you don't want to be like a dork. And when he finally says to him, "Hey kid, you play golf?" And he thought, "There's my opening." And he's like, "Good, find us a place to play tomorrow." and the extraordinary lengths he went to make sure that he didn't screw that up, that he got it, that he got it and he got it right and all those things. So this will be great. This will be a great listen and a great remembrance. And like I said, I think people will find great joy in these people that were so closely associated with him and were touched by him over the years.
All right, here we go. Let's jump in. Some of the greatest Bob Uecker stories over the last 100 episodes of the Inside Wisconsin show.
Ueck's been awesome. He didn't talk to me for 6 weeks, when I first got the job. I went and introduced myself and, "Hey, I'm the new guy." He goes, "I know who you are." Okay. And then I left. And then I didn't talk to him for 6 weeks. And I was scared to death of him. I was sure, because I'm pretty good friends with Matt Vasgersian, and Matt was like giving me the whole, "Hey, Bob Uecker, like, awesome dude, but there's some things you need to know." Okay. And at that time, Bob, like, the stalker was a real thing. She was kind of popping up everywhere, and they were very concerned about that individual. So I was, anyway, he didn't talk to me for 6 weeks. So we go out. We were in Miami, and I walked past him on the bus, and he goes, "Hey, you're a golfer?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, we're playing golf tomorrow. You want to play golf tomorrow?" I said, "Sure." He goes, "Can you get us set up somewhere?" I said, "Sure." So I called,
that would be great.
All night, like feverishly calling all my friends. Anybody in Miami? Bob Francesco happened to be the head pro at this place, and we went and played. And Uecker, the first 9 holes, I get detailed on the story because it totally changed our relationship. But the first 9 holes, he told me everything. We talked about the organization, the history of the organization, who you can piss off, who you can't. This is important. This guy was here. Context for everything. It was unbelievable for 9 holes. And then we get turned to the back 9. He goes, we're playing the head pro and the club champion at this golf club. And he goes, I think we can take these guys. Because I was playing pretty good back then. I'd come from Golf Channel. I was like a 2 handicap. He goes, I think we can take these guys. So he's like, before I can even say sure, he goes, hey, we're going to take you 2 on. The old guy and the young guy, we're taking you 2 on. So we played them, and I played the 9 holes of my life. I was like 2 under, and we beat him. And thank God we beat him, because Bob then immediately, like, the next day, hey, BA, he can play. And we were best friends, and we played a lot of golf and when he was still traveling. So I'm thankful that he took the time to let me know how it was, but I feel like if I would have sucked at golf that day,
Right.
We would have never spoken again. And so
you're right. Starstruck, first time I met him, yes. And then when you sit there and you're his partner for the first time in a spring training game, and you have to I talked about the scorebook, I think, in the last commercial break, but like, it's Stonehenge. Look at this thing. This is just half of a season, right? Like, this is Ueck and me scoring a game. Look at that perfect handwriting. Look at the changes there. Like, that was my biggest worry, because one of the first things I had to learn with working with Ueck, not just how to broadcast with him, but I had to learn how to score like him too. Because when we share the scorebook, we'll pass it back and forth to each other in the middle of the game. So he has to be able to read my handwriting, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, scoring a game is different for everybody. It's some similarities, but I had to learn how to score like he did. That was my biggest off-season project when I got the number 2 job full-time, was learning how to score like him so that I could keep Stonehenge and figure out what type of pen that he likes so that he could see it with his eyes. It's unbelievable. We got some books with coffee stains where you could like spill a coffee, and it's game 2 of this beautiful, fresh new book. And then you've got coffee stains for the rest of the season. It's wonderful.
So give us your best Bob Uecker story.
Oh, man.
Right, you just get one. That's it. Just one.
Yeah, just one or 10. You can talk for as long as you want.
Okay. Well, I will just say, I mean, we all know like how funny he is, and honestly, his longevity to me, how sharp he is, and the fact that he is working as many games as he is at his age, and the quality of his broadcast still. It's unbelievable to me. I think about it a lot, of just everything that he's gone through in his life, and this is still what brings him so much joy. And I think it's a great lesson for all of us of like, finding that thing that gives you so much joy. And for him, he just loves coming to the park every day, and he loves being around the team, and he loves telling stories, and he loves making people laugh. And I think about, like the joy he has given all of us, as people who grew up listening to him, as, Brewers fans, as just baseball fans. It's an incredible gift that he has. And I feel like he's a comedic genius with, everything that he has done. And I don't think he gets enough credit for that, honestly. It's just how, sharp and brilliant and kind of genius he is with what he does. But I think for me personally, what has meant the most, and this probably isn't the story that you guys are looking for, but just having his acceptance and his support from the time that I started with the team has been, I get emotional thinking about it, because he didn't owe that to me. I don't even work on the radio side, and he has been, you talk about like the challenge of being a woman in sports, like he never made me feel that way. He accepted me. I've learned so much from him. He has treated me with so much kindness, and like we now, I feel like, have a really good friendship, which is insane to say, but I'm so grateful for him, and just how he just treated me with like the utmost respect, and he would point out things that he didn't like, like, well, I don't like when the guys say this around you. I don't like, this, if you ever need it, it's like he has really stepped up in a big way for me personally. So I will just forever be grateful to him for that.
That's 100% the story we were looking for. What a cool behind the scenes story.
One of the greatest parts of this job over the course of, about 27 years that I was able to travel with Ueck was to hear his stories on the buses, on the planes, in the press room, some of the stories that he would tell. I would say this, that there is nobody on the face of the earth that I would rather get a look at his contact list on his phone than Bob Uecker. He's got some of the greatest, people in the world. I mean, actors, actresses, presidents, you name it. I mean, Uecker, Bob talks to him. And there were times when we were on our way to the ballpark somewhere and, George Bush would be calling him. It's like, gosh, but I mean, Ueck has a great perspective. I've learned so much from Bob Uecker. I mean, I've never really actually worked with him. He's always been radio. I've always been TV. But just some of the wisdom that he's imparted on me in that, how to do this job, to enjoy doing this job, never take this job for granted. It's a privilege to be in baseball, and it's a privilege to be a broadcaster. It's a privilege to go on that field. It's a privilege to go in that clubhouse. He has never forgotten that. And he also always, in listening to him do a game, he never, these are the types of things he doesn't say a whole lot, unless you ask him. But, don't ever let this game get personal. I mean, you can point out what happened, what should have happened, why it didn't happen, those types of things, but don't make it personal. Don't identify names. Just say in generalities, because, players understand that you have a job. And if they make a mistake, like yesterday, Willie Adames, the Brewers are down by 5. He hits a double off the wall, right? I think it's in the 7th inning. And, he drives in 2 runs, but then he gets thrown out at third base for the 3rd out, So, again, you don't get personal with it. You just say, hey, you never make the 3rd out at third base, especially when you're down by 3 runs after 2 runs scored on that double. But, Ueck, he's one of the guys. He's always been one of the guys. I mean, he's not a broadcaster per se. He's one of the guys that is in the radio booth. And, the guys love him. We all love him. We miss him when he's not at the ballpark, but we're very fortunate. The Brewers are fortunate. Milwaukee, very fortunate, because that over time he had many opportunities to go elsewhere and probably make a lot more money than he was making with the Brewers. He's from Milwaukee. He grew up with Bud Selig. He's a very loyal guy, and for that we're very fortunate.
Tell us about your relationship with Bob.
He's just authentic, like that's what you see is what you get. It's Ueck, and but to see him now day in and day out, I'm telling you guys, it's an incredible story. Day in and day out, he's in the clubhouse. He knows every player's name. I don't know every player's name. He knows every player's first and last name, and he knows something about him. He knows it's just amazing, his recall. It's amazing how interested he is. And I have to remind the guys, I'm like, do you know what this dude's been through? You know what he's done? When you think of the challenges he's had in life, and then you think about what he accomplished and how he remains humble and just himself and willing to help somebody else on a daily. It's incredible. The man, he's truly an icon.
I got to go up and meet Bob Uecker, and I've never met him before. And of course, I'm a huge fan of Major League, and I think he's really funny. And of course, the voice of the Brewers like forever since I was like a kid. And dude, he was like nicest guy in the world. It was the coolest thing ever. He had this huge refrigerator full of beer in there, full of Miller Lite, of course. And as soon as I get in there, he's like, "Oh, nice to meet you." He starts talking. He's like, "Let's grab a beer. You want one?" And he's he was only announcing a few innings, he said, and he told me some really cool things. It was really neat talking to him. So that was definitely a highlight of the night. That's
pretty cool.
What a cool guy.
We've had a great relationship, and he's been really good. He's yelled at me many times. There are some Uecker rules that are involved, and I understand it, and I've never met anybody as famous. And he is trapped in his own fame a lot. You don't see it so much because he doesn't travel anymore. But we know those last few years when he was traveling, and he's in his late 70s and 80s at that point, and he can't go 2 steps, and it's just swarmed. He's more famous than any player, and I almost feel sorry for him a little bit in that. But a world-class broadcaster. If you heard his call of the Vogelbach Grand Slam, he's 87 years old in year 50. Year 50 in the booth.
Yeah.
Never trained, never thinks about broadcasting, just does it totally on instincts. He's never taken any kind of broadcasting classes or anything. And he nailed that call so great. I mean, it was flawless in its execution and power and punch and time and space and everything. It's like, that's what we're all trying to get to as announcers. And he just does it because he is Bob Uecker. And he and Vin Scully and Ernie Harwell, for me, that's like, the 3 greatest baseball play-by-play announcers that have ever lived. And it's an absolute honor to be around him every day and to hear his humor. He's so funny. It just pours out of him. Even when he's not trying to be funny, he's funny. And, it's been like the coolest thing I could ever dream of in my life, to have been able to ride on the 4:00 bus with Bob Uecker every day to the ballpark. It's been awesome.
Some of the best stuff about my first year in 2015, and some of my greatest lessons were just sitting in the booth with Bob. So I'd be at every home game. I didn't do every road trip. Bob did some road trips, but I did most of them. So I didn't have a chance to talk with him on the road, which is when you really get the chance to know somebody. But when Bob was in his off innings, he would sit and talk with me in those 3 innings. And I learned more talking to him in those 3 innings than I would have doing 15 years worth of baseball on the air. So it was like life lessons with Ueck, having conversations with him and just getting to know him a little bit. And then I become his partner the next year. And, I kind of knew how to be his partner, and it was more like, shut up, don't talk. And when I'm with him, Ueck has so many different ways to broadcast, right? So I've got so many Ueck stories, and I'm sure we'll get into them, but I mean, the fact that he tells stories in different layers, and depending on how he's feeling on that particular day is kind of going to tell you how many different layers you want to peel off of this onion for the story. And all I'm there to do is just poke the bear and get more out of him. Nobody cares about what I'm talking about. Like, you're sitting there in the bar and you're listening to the game or watching the game. The 3rd and the 4th and the 7th inning, when I'm on, they switch to the TV broadcast, and then they go back to the Ueck inning. So it's great for me. It's awesome. So when I'm with Ueck and I'm his partner, I'm just poking the bear and trying to get more stories out of him and seeing how deep he wants to get into these stories. And as Wisconsin fans, you know exactly how a game's going within 2 minutes of turning a game on when Ueck's on. It's either a blowout one way or the other. If he's talking about the game, then it's a close game. So working with Bob has been amazing.
I had a real big advantage over other guys that have come in to work with Bob. Jeff had a little bit of this advantage too, in that, I didn't work with Bob. I think I worked 4 games with Bob in like my first 5 years with the Brewers, first 4 years with the Brewers. And then I started working with him more regularly over the last 3. And so I've had a chance to develop this chemistry with him off air that has, to some degree, carried over to us when we're on the air together. And I think that's a big advantage. Other guys had to get hired, come in, and kind of work on that on the fly. Jeff had a year where he was in the role that I've been in for a long time, which was kind of the 3rd guy in the booth. And then, of course, by year 2, Jeff ascended into the chair next to Bob at that point in time. So he had a little bit of time with Bob too, where you get to know him a little bit and you kind of understand the ins and outs of Bob and when to get in and when to get out. But I think there are times because of his personality too. He's such an entertainer. He's a great play-by-play man. He's a great entertainer, and he weaves those 2 things together better than I think anybody that's ever done it. And it becomes very, I guess, casual would be one of the ways that I would describe it. It becomes this fun kind of weaving in and out of baseball script that you're following over the course of 9 innings. And it is kind of easy to just get lost in that. And sometimes you have to go, oh, wait, yeah, no, like I got to hit the high notes still. And I gotta punch it when there's a big play, and not just it's almost like when you're a role player on a team with a star, and you get caught kind of watching that star if it's basketball with the basketball or whatever it is, because you're just in awe of the greatness. It's a little bit that way with Bob, right? Like, I'm smart enough to know I'm a role player on that broadcast, and he's the star. And so you kind of get caught sometimes just watching the greatness. And I think that's okay, but you do have to be conscious of it because you've got a job to do too.
Like there's reverence there, right? And we're not done. We've got more clips to come, but there's reverence there from those guys. And when this happened, I sent a text to Tim Kirkshin, ESPN's great baseball analyst, just to say, wow, it's kind of a sad to hear this news. Do you have any good Bob Uecker stories? And I thought, wait, he just text me one, and the guy calls me, and he went on and on about Uecker, whether it was one time Tim spoke at a Brewers Caravan, which, by the way, is the very first time I actually saw Bob Uecker. I'd heard him. And it would have been after George Bamberger's first year. So what was Bambi? 79-ish, 78, 79. And so they'd had that great year. And so they took the caravan out, and my dad took me over to the Riverside Ballroom in Green Bay, and we listened to Bob Uecker, and he just was so fall down, like the room exploded constantly, and came back. And I just thought, like, that was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. And I can still, like, I think I saved the plate, or, like a kneecap that they saved. Like, it was just the program, I bet I could still find somewhere in the billion boxes that I have in this house. And it was just such a mesmerizing thing. And he was so funny that way. And so Tim was telling me the same thing, that he had to speak at this Brewer Caravan. And he's like, oh my gosh, he goes, and Bob went out and orchestrated the thing as MC without a note for 3 hours. And he said, what you'd think, which is amazing, is you listen to Bob Uecker tell these jokes. And he talked about how Jeremy Burnitz had been traded. And so there's been talk about, oh my gosh, Jeremy Burnitz. And he goes, it's certainly way different than when I was traded, when 50% of the people were just so excited and so happy to have me gone. And the other 50% were like, yep, he's a disgrace to the uniform. And he said, so he was just so funny. And Tim was like, so you'd think, oh my God, how do I follow that? Right? Like, oh, what's the worst speaking thing you could do is like, how do I follow that guy? And he goes, it was just the opposite. The way he made you feel, the way he introduced you, the way he warmed up the crowd. He goes, he put me totally at ease, and it was a wonderful event. And every time he saw him, Bob had a great big hug. He goes, and I don't even know that I was that close to him, other than, people kind of know who I am. And he said, he gave me advice when I went to the sausage race that you should wrap yourself in saran wrap like a sausage casing for a couple of days, just to kind of get the feel for what it would be like to truly be a sausage. And it was just, he just had nothing but glowing things to say. And then he talked about his Hall of Fame induction speech he got the Ford Frick Award back in 2003. And he gave just the funny, again, just sat up there, not a note card. And he had all these Hall of Famers and the whole world in stitches for these 15 minutes about, when he famously said, he was a little offended because he really thought he should be in there as a player, but not an announcer. But going through all this, and Tim and I were but he said something that I thought was amazing. And I've been kind of rolling it over my head to see if I think it's true or not. But he said, once Yogi Berra died, he said, I think he took the mantle. I think Bob Uecker took the mantle and was the most beloved man in all of baseball.
Wow. Who was
most
more
beloved
popular?
man in all of baseball? That's whether that's Ohtani playing, whether that is, Joe Torre managing, whatever it is. And he said, I think Bob Uecker was the most beloved man in baseball. And I'm like, wow, that's quite something.
Can you think of somebody that was more popular than Bob Uecker? I mean, so many of these stories have people coming that are the biggest names in you name it, and they want to meet Bob Uecker. Like, who in their right mind wouldn't have wanted to meet Bob Uecker?
Right. Sadly, right, we will always have that hole in the Inside Wisconsin show, because we really wanted him, how we were going to get him, because we know people, a lot of people knew him and trying to get his time, and we'll never get that. But yeah, all those guys talked about him like, within that organization, or the Milwaukee kind of baseball, people talked about how it was amazing if they could meet Uecker and Hank Aaron. And think about that. One guy had more home runs than anybody else in the history of the game, and people still consider him to some degree the all-time home run king. The other guy batted 200 and played in 297 games. And yet they both, you got a Hank there? Got the hammer?
He's here.
Yeah.
The hammer's
and
here.
And yet those guys were both almost equally revered, which is staggering, you know?
Yeah.
And by the way, kind of like Hank Aaron, Uecker, he homered off Sandy Koufax too.
That's right.
Homered off 3 Hall of Famers: Koufax, Fergie Jenkins, and Gaylord Perry. So in some ways, he was just exactly like Hank. But the reverence they had for him is, well, listen, he's Mr. Baseball. What do you do? He's Mr. Baseball.
Literally Mr. Baseball. This bobblehead was gifted to me 2021. It says this is the Bob Uecker announcing bobblehead that was sponsored by WTMJ, the Brewers. Listen to this once.
3-2, 2 outs, 4-4, 9th inning. Gantner, there he goes. The pitch.
Gantner.
Right field and deep. Get up, and get out of here. Go!
Gantner. What was that?
Get out of here, gone.
You know, I'm like, I can remember like it was yesterday being at, up in Minocqua at our cabin in the summer, and like, having the Brewers on and get up, get out of here, gone, for like, it's just funny because when I'm in the cage during the game hitting and I hear him on the loudspeaker and stuff or I hear him, in the cages and stuff, and he's talking and I'm like, man, I'm like, this is just unbelievable. I'm like, this is all I used to listen to when I was little. Like, that's just, Ueck was always on in the car or anywhere. So, I think I talked to him a little bit about Major League too, and his time from those movies. I always loved those movies too. I just think it was funny that he just was like himself in the movies. Like he just kind of was like,
Right.
Hey, Ueck, just kind of go do your thing, And like, I think that's hilarious. So
That was awesome.
But yeah, what a guy, what a legend. And it's cool seeing him around the locker room and stuff.
Tell us about the first time you met Bob Uecker.
Oh my goodness. That was in spring training. And then you hear the iconic voice over there. You're in the clubhouse, you hear the voice, and then all of a sudden you hear him saying lines from Major League. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is hilarious. And you just kind of like get a little bit closer to where he is talking anytime that he was in the clubhouse. And he's great because in spring training, he would come around the clubhouse a lot and make guys feel comfortable. Players like me, he would say hi to you and just make you feel like, you were a guy that kind of belonged. And so it was cool. It was really cool. Bob is an absolute legend. He's a great guy. And just to hear some of his lines from Major League, just absolutely awesome.
Well, the first time I ever met him was the day before Christmas Eve in 2014. He was my last interview before I got the job initially. So, I mean, it's at Don and Charlie's, the famous steakhouse. It's no longer there anymore in Scottsdale with all the great stuff on the walls. And I showed up half an hour early because I didn't want to be late. And Ueck was already sitting there for half an hour because he got the time wrong. But who am I to say that he got the damn time wrong? So, I mean, he's sitting there with his wife, and he just has this amazing knack of disarming you within about 5 seconds. He just starts doing his thing and talking to you like you've been friends for 100 years. And I'll never forget this. When I was talking with him that night at Don and Charlie's, I'm nervous. I'm probably sweating through my blue shirt. And within 5 minutes of our conversation, Bud Selig walks around the corner at Don and Charlie's, and Ueck stands up and says, "Hey, Al." And who calls Bud Selig Al except for Ueck, right? So he goes, "Hey, Al, I want to introduce you to Jeff. He's going to be working with us next year." And you talk about a crap your pants moment. Like, I don't even have the job yet. And he's telling the former commissioner of baseball that I'm going to be working with him next year. Okay.
So I ended up having breakfast with Bob. I think it was Tuesday morning. And we had breakfast in Scottsdale. And I got there first, and I'm sitting at the table, and I remember seeing him get out of his car and walk in, and it was a oh my gosh moment. Like, that is Bob Uecker, and he's coming to have breakfast with me. And so we sat there for, I bet it was 2.5 hours at breakfast, and I was pounding coffee. And I wasn't even a huge coffee drinker at the time, but just nervous. It's Bob Uecker. And so I'm pounding coffee. And probably an hour and a half in, I got to go to the bathroom. But he's telling stories. I mean, he's in Bob Uecker story mode. And I don't want to interrupt him. It's Bob Uecker, right? So finally, there like is this window, maybe 2 hours in. I'm like, hey, Bob, would it be okay if I went to the restroom? And he's like, how long have you had to go? He's like, come on, man, go to the bathroom. So I went, came back, and then we wrapped up. And basically, he stuck his hand out at the end and said, I can't wait to work with you. And that was kind of the, okay, here we go moment. And it was really something to hear him say that.
He's a special human being. And again, those moments that I had with him my first year where I'm just sitting in the booth and he's talking with me about God knows what, doing the ABC Superstars show with Boog Powell and playing pranks with Kenny Boyer, Mickey Mantle. And he brings up stories about Howard Cosell. And I mean, depending on where you want to go with this podcast, I mean, I could tell a lot of great stories.
The answer is yes. That's where we want to go. What you just thought of, that's where we want to go.
Oh man, there's some great stories where Howard had a couple too many to drink, and he was doing Superstars and sitting with Bart Starr in a bar, and Howard Cosell comes back down from his hotel room and he had forgot to put his hairpiece back on, and Mickey Mantle's at the bar, which leads to a whole nother story and segment that we could get into, but we won't. But the fact that he walked down without his hairpiece on, I think shocked the world. This is Cosell, of course. But he's the kind of guy that you never get old. He could tell the same story. I've heard some of these stories 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, but for whatever reason, they always sound different. And they always sound so cool. Like this picture over my shoulder with Ueck on the motorcycle. Like, who else can do these things? Who else can have the type of career that he's had to where he's a professional athlete, spends time in the Army before he becomes a professional baseball player. Then he's on the Johnny Carson show 100 times. Then he's in movies and doing animated films. He's in the Monsters Inc. TV show, or like Puppy Dog Pals. Like, who does that at 85 years old? Ueck does.
It was 2019. We're in Arizona, right, for a series with the Diamondbacks, and the second to last night we were there, he decides that he wants to eat from the concession stands, and he tells me before the game, like, let's go out to the concession stands and get our food. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me what you want, I'll go get it for you. And he's like, no, I'll go. And I'm like, it's a bad idea. Like, I don't think that's going to go well. Everybody's going to be pointing at you and wanting to take pictures. And like, you're going to have a hard time getting from the press box to the concession stand. And he's like, no, it'll be fine. That's no big deal. And so we went, and immediately we got off the elevator and people are pointing, and it's Bob Uecker in a baseball stadium. Pretty recognizable. And I think the first guy stood and pointed at him for a second, and he goes, Robin Yount. And we're like, no, not Robin Yount. And then a couple other people, came up and asked for a picture. Bob Uecker, Mr. Baseball, a lot of those comments. And then we were in line, and the lady was staring at us for quite a while. And she finally said, I think I know you from a TV show, to Bob. And Belvedere. And so that was interesting, just walking a concourse with Bob Uecker, where everybody's coming up to him and trying to talk to him. And you hear the just a bit outside, like every 5 steps you take, somebody's yelling that on the concourse. Jeez. So that was a good education in, like, is Bob Uecker recognizable outside of Milwaukee? Yeah, very much so.
You never know who's going to come in the booth. You never know. There was a couple of years ago when Robin Yount was in town doing a signing, and then the former governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, his son was working for the Brewers at the time, and he came in for the weekend and wanted to meet Ueck. So here's Bob and Chris Christie and Robin Yount sitting in the back table in the back of the booth. And you're like, dude, what alternate universe am I in right now? What am I doing? This is insane. So that's a game where I worked 5 innings because Bob was up there and chit-chatting and doing whatever. When he had his 50th anniversary this year, he ended up not working that day. It was a busy day, and he had all this fanfare, and rightfully so. So I did the play-by-play at home, and Lane was working with me. And there was a time in, I think, the 5th or 6th inning where in the booth was Robin Yount, Paul Molitor, and Ueck, and they're just sitting there, and they're talking shop like they're best friends, like they are. Well, Robin and Bob certainly are. They live right down the street from each other in Arizona. But they're talking, and I'm in the middle of doing play-by-play, and Lane probably jumped up to grab a pint of Cedar Crest ice cream or something. And all of a sudden, they're taking a group photo with Kent, our engineer for 1,000 years. And Robin yells, he goes, wait, we got to get Jeff in this picture. And I'm doing the play-by-play. We're in the middle of the inning. So he starts yelling at me, and then he finally grabs my shirt and goes, come take a picture. So in the middle of the inning, I took my headset off, and I was like, you know what? Robin Yount is telling me I got to go take a picture. So I took my headset off, went and took the picture, came back down and missed one pitch. And then you've got content for a week just with that story. So you just learn to adapt. And those are the types of things that you don't get anywhere else.
When was the last time you sat there and just kind of shook your head and just went, you know, what a crazy, whether it's a story he was telling, not just the person, but just where you sat there and he started in on whether it was, you know, here I am, Bob Gibson and I were taking the picture where I'm holding his hand. Like, when was the last time he dropped one of those just as casually as could be? And yet you were like, that's, boy, that's what a good day I'm having at work.
It almost happens daily, which is crazy. He'll tell Mickey Mantle stories, or he'll tell a story about how he was in the minor leagues in Louisville and went to the stables with some of the atomic bomb spread, and then took a ruler and was whipping the horses in the ass with it. He'll get into Mickey Mantle stories, but the one that I always go to, there's two. Game 163 at Wrigley in 2018, where the Brewers win the division in the 163rd game. He's on the call. It's at Wrigley. It's a great game. And you get to hear Ueck, and it was the first time I'd heard him say, and they're the champions. And that was goosebumps for me. Just hearing him say that and just looking over at him and watching him take in the scene, as he's calling it, you just, there's no better way to learn.
The walk-off slam from Vogelback, because I was in the booth with Ueck that day, and the minute he hit it, I knew that he got it, and so I just spun my chair like around because I just wanted to watch Ueck call it. Because how many chances am I going to have to see Bob Uecker call a walk-off grand slam? And so I barely even watched the ball go over the wall. I turned and just watched him. And I mean, I did. I had goosebumps because he nailed the call. It was amazing. And, eventually he turned and started talking to me afterwards. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm on the air. Like, because I just became a fan in that moment, and kind of a fan of Bob as much as I was Daniel Vogelback. And so that was really neat.
The one for me is that kind of always stands out was in 2019, and we were in Cincinnati, and he was on the trip because it was the end of the season and the Brewers were getting close to clinching. So the last road trip of the year was Cincinnati and Colorado. And I grew up in Northern California. I grew up a Giants fan from day number one. Behind me is Willie Mays making the catch. And the Brewers clinch. They clinch a spot in the playoffs in 2019. We're in Cincinnati, and we're about ready to go down and do the celebration. And Ueck, we finish up our part of the postgame show, and Ueck gets a call from Joe Torre on his cell phone. And him and Joe go back, and Frank and Ueck were roommates back in their Braves days. So they're tight. So Joe gets on the phone with Ueck. He goes, hey, Ueck, I have someone here that wants to talk to you. And he goes, okay, who you got? And he's on the speakerphone, and I'm sitting right next to him. And this voice comes on the phone, and he goes, hey, Ueck. How you doing, my man? And Ueck kind of sits there. He goes, I know this voice. And it clicks. And he says, Willie. He's talking to Willie Mays. He's talking to Willie Mays on a speakerphone. And I crapped my pants for a second. I went, oh my God, he is talking to Willie Mays right now. This is amazing. And then he starts telling him that Willie says, hey, Ueck, what are you doing these days? He goes, well, I'm still working. I get an at-bat every week. They still let me play. And Willie's kind of hook, line, and sinker buying it. No, man, they're not letting you play anymore. No, it's one at-bat, but, I'm still part of the team. And they're letting me do it. And him having this 5-minute conversation with Willie Mays was just spellbinding for me. Just amazing that I get to sit here and witness these two legends have a conversation in their 80s, and it was like they had no time had passed since the last time they saw each other. That was an amazing one for me.
That's terrific. That is great. He ever tell you about the time he was in the swimsuit issue?
Yes. But the Brewers traveling secretary made T-shirts of that.
Did they?
And we all wore them on a plane trip. I should have worn it today. Darn it. I should have worn it today. But it's just a silhouette of him in the background watching these guys play ping pong in the short shorts. It's perfect. It's so good.
Do you know what that one is?
No, I'm going to look it up as soon as we're done, though.
People yell at me all the time. I like Uecker better. Me too. I agree. I would too if I was in your position. But yeah, that you're not beating that.
We love the stories, and you know what? When he stops telling the stories, we're gonna be missing.
It's gonna be the worst.
Yeah, the worst. Some of the greatest calls in the history of Wisconsin sports came out of the mouth of the one and only Bob Uecker.
Mm-hmm.
I know you said at the beginning, I don't want to be sad, right? I want to remember what it was all about. There's a part of me, no joke, that was sad. Like I felt myself welling up earlier before we jumped on. It's just, I don't know. My life is not where I am with this thing in front of me, unless it's for Bob Uecker. I'm not even kidding. It is why I am doing what we're doing, and I'm grateful, I guess.
Yeah. I've told people all the time, like when I grew up, I didn't call games in my basement into like Kevin Harlan into a radio or into a tape recorder or any of that stuff. So I never wanted to be the voice of the Yankees, but I did say, but I would have taken the voice of the Brewers to be like Bob Uecker. And so, yeah, certainly, like I said, I'm saddened, but I'm not going to I'm not going to grieve so hard that I forget what joy that guy brought for, literally my entire lifetime. He was on the radio. And the thing that I always hope people that knew him from Johnny Carson or knew him from Mr. Belvedere or knew him for Harry Doyle in Major League, just a bit outside. Like, how much did that guy just rock? Like, everybody was like, how do I listen to Brewer games if that's how that guy is on the radio, or I must be in the front row. People that knew him for this comic genius, comic sensibility he had. All of that is out there, and all of that true, the wit and the wisdom and all those things. But if you're like you and I, or anybody in Wisconsin that listens to his Brewer fan, when it came to the game, he wasn't always super funny. He knew the craft of broadcasting and getting the game to you. He knew it inside and out. He knew when guys were going to throw a curveball. He knew when it called for a fastball up and in. And he called the game. There was a craft to what he did. And then he certainly knew when to put in humor. But night in and night out, what he was an unbelievably great baseball broadcaster. And hopefully, and I don't think it will, that doesn't get lost, especially tonight when you'll see obituaries locally, but when his obituary will run on SportsCenter. And when you see that, there will be all those famous clips, right? There'll be some Harry Doyle clips, and there will be Miller Lite clips, and there will be all that stuff. I hope they don't miss that he was a great, great, great broadcaster. And the last word I'll have on this, for me, I'm not trying to take the last word, and I may have told you this a couple years, it's been a decade now. I played in Leroy Butler's golf tournament, and it was down just outside of Milwaukee. And we got done, we had all this thing, and my family was up in Door County. And so I had to drive up, like everybody in Wisconsin, I had to go to DC, which, Door County. And I got in the car and the game had just started. So he was calling more than just a couple innings. And I listened and I thought, boy, this was just like my child. And I listened from the time I got in that car until I drove into the parking lot where we were staying and the game was finishing up and I was listening to the post game. And I thought that was the quickest, like it just flew by, most enjoyable ride I had had in the longest time. Just me in the car listening to Bob Uecker call baseball. And, you know, it was part of me was like, gosh, it's a shame we're not going to 12 innings. I'd have ended up in Escanaba because I'd have just kept going. I would not have pulled over. I'd just like, okay, here I'm 14 innings. We're in Iron Mountain. But I would have kept going. And that will be kind of my lasting memory is that day, just driving in my car that evening and listening to Uecker and just thinking how lucky I was that was my childhood, was to get to listen to him. And not only my childhood, but continued into adulthood and to affect so many other generations of Wisconsin and Brewer baseball fans who came along.
All right, so here's how we're going to end this. I have the official Bob Uecker Magic 8 Ball.
Oh, nice.
I want you to ask a question to the Bob Uecker Magic 8 Ball.
I don't know.
We're gonna see what the you go.
Will the Brewers win a World Series in my lifetime?
Okay, and the
That's
answer
the
is
only question I have. Come through.
Ask me again next inning.
Okay, we'll do that. At least it wasn't hell no.
I don't know that there's a hell no in here.
You know?
Oh man. Oh, here you wouldn't have liked this one. Outlook cloudy. Close the roof.
Yep. But we'd have to do that. So we'll just bring it up again next inning.
Oh, well.
When the Brewers announce their plans for whatever it is, whether they have their there will certainly be some memorial service when they figure out what they're going to put on the uniform, because there'll be something commemorative, some sort of patch or logo. I'll ask the question again.
Yeah, okay, we'll do it again. All right, J.A., thanks for jumping on. A tough day in Wisconsin, but also a really, really grateful day in Wisconsin. We lost.
Remember how much joy that guy brought you, especially in years when the team was not good. You knew Uecker would always be there, and he would be great.
We lost him, but we will never forget him. Bob Uecker passes away at the age of 90.